Okay, here we are again in the Shiloh Bible Study class this morning, and it's good to be back. And before we get started here, I really want to thank Brother Jim and Brother Ron. We're kind of going to start tag teaming this thing, and we're appreciate their help with this. This lesson today is kind of it's kind of hard to teach to when the whole class is really made up of saved people and most of us are older, but yet there's some things that we need to see about this, and I want to throw some statistics at you, and I'm not going to dwell on it a whole lot, but I looked this up. This lesson today is about begins in the 13th of what's called the wise men's saying in the book of Solomon. So what it is these wise proverbs trying to tell these young men how they ought to act as they get older, that's what a lot of this is about. But this today primarily is about wild living. It's about drinking, abusing alcohol, and in the New Testament there's a word there that some people sometimes get mixed up with a lot of this, that there's 13 occurrences in 9 different verses in the New Testament that uses the word sober, and in there and in that, most all of those except for a couple of them have to do with being serious and serious-minded about this thing of witnessing for the Lord and this thing of just being a Christian. And but a lot of people get that mixed up, and it's just not the same thing. But I was looking, I got curious about it, and I kind of did one of those Google things, and it said that, now this comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association, these statistics. And they said that Americans spend $19.9 billion on liquor a year last year. I couldn't hardly imagine that. But then it said that as far as beer goes, that they drank 65.5 billion glasses of beer a day. And then 7.9 billion gallons of booze in 2019 that people drank. And when you look at that and you see that, there's a problem with that. I know that, I have to be gentle, I guess, about this, but I know that some people do have alcohol. I'm talking about Christian people now, have alcohol in their home. I know for a fact that a lot of that is regional in different parts of the country, some more than others. But Solomon had a lot to say about that. And another bit of a disclaimer here before we jump into the Bible. The lesson writer in here, if you're following after your book, he said Solomon said this. Said these sayings. And there's a lot of debate about that. There was an Egyptian in the 6th and 7th century that was an author, and he wrote down a lot of things. And a lot of what Solomon wrote in these things that was written were verbatim. They were word for word. And so there's a debate in that about who wrote what. But if you turn back, in class, if you turn back in your Bible to chapter 22, and begin to look there at verse 17. It says, "Bow down thine ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply thine heart unto thy knowledge." And the conventional mindset about this is that there were wise teachers that were also teaching things, and just as Solomon was too. And so this lends itself to the thought that these 30 sayings came from those men, those wise men. So having said all that, and maybe you know, to back up one thing for the Christian, because this is important to our testimony and how we live, whether we live here in southeast Missouri or whether you live in Louisiana where some of my family lives, or friends in Oregon and friends in Southern California, and they, some of those people will make use of alcohol. But what for us, and I'm going to say for me, right now, Paul said to the church at Corinth, in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 6, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, that he said, all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient for me. Not all things lift up the name of the Lord, and I personally do not want to be involved in this kind of thing. I used to belong to one of the veterans organizations, and when I got saved, when I was saved, the Holy Spirit just said, you really don't need to be involved in this because of the reputation of that. So we got out of that. But anyway, what I want to do, there's 30 sayings here in this section, and then there's a little break in it, and then it goes on with some more. And this was Egyptian style of writing, really, back in that day. And so, but the first one starts in chapter 22, verse 22, where it says, rob not the poor. And we're not going to go into that because the lesson today actually begins in chapter 23, verse 17. And he says, let not thine heart envy sinners, but be thou in the fear of the Lord all the day long. In those verses there, you know, I kind of want to hold this up here where I can look at this book and look at the camera a little more directly. That it says, let not thy heart envy sinners. Back in the book of Exodus, where we have the list of the 10 Commandments, that word envy, covet what others have, is the 10th commandment, that thou shalt not covet. And so we're told right off the bat, these wise teachers, or Solomon, whoever wrote it, they're saying right off the bat not to envy sinners. Sometimes, in the context now of what we're talking about, it looks like those people are right on top of the world and they've just got everything, like my dad used to say, got the world by the tail with a downhill drag, and everything just goes their way. And the wisdom, the conventional wisdom here says, don't envy these people like that. And then he says, but be thou in the fear, or the awe and the reverence of the Lord all the day long. And that where in the King James Version where it says all the day long, it's talking about as you travel in your life, wherever your life takes you, this is a good way for you to live in the fear of the Lord, this word of awe and reverence or respect for God. Brother Steve preached the other night, and he talked about how that we ought to worship God just because He's God, not for everything that He does for us, but just because He's God and who He is and what He's done for that. But he goes on there in verse 18 and he said, for surely there's an end. We are not going to live forever. We have a short time on this earth, really, in the span of time. We're just a spit in the wind, and we're here and we're gone. James said we're like grass. We're here 1 minute and the sun comes up and it withers and we're gone. And then as you're looking at it, it talks about how, whatever we've gained, it all belongs to somebody else at that breath. But he said, surely there is an end, and life does come to an end for all of us sooner or later. But how we live that life is what makes the difference in how we die when we get to it, when we come to that point. Then he says that conjunction there, and he says, and thine expectation, I lost my place there, and thine expectation shall not be cut off. You will we will, me, Brother Jim, Brother Ron, Brother Lyndall, people in this room will, when you come to the end of that, if you live right, then there's a reward at the end of the road. And that's what he's saying. You can expect to live a good, blessed life. That does not mean that there'll not be bumps in the road, but because there will be bumps, and we all know that. But yet we have a time that if we follow the Lord and we live our life in fear and awe and reverence to God, and we've accepted Jesus as our personal Lord and Savior, and along with that the end of that is going to be heaven. And we kind of drew this thing up here a little bit, and it's kind of rough, but you get the point. The Bible says narrow is the way that leads to heaven, that leads to Jesus. And there's parameters, there's boundaries that we are allowed to go to and take. And it seems like today so many people want to stay as close to the edge of the world as they can get instead of following the Lord. But we talk about today all the things that draw people away. People go to carnivals and those bright lights draw them in, and everything's flashing and everything's looking pretty and all that. And these old beer joints are the same way. They look good on the outside, and you've heard me say before, I've worked carpenter work all my life. That a beer joint is the nastiest place in the world when you turn the lights on. They really are. We might get back to that later on, but we're going to move on with this thing a little bit right now. We look at these verses in a positive light, verses 17 and 18, that we should not be envious of others, that we should live our life in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, follow and do what God expects us to do, and that at the end of that time, when that's all said and done in our life here on earth, all we can really leave behind us is our testimony, our reputation. And so let's leave a good one and leave it at that. He goes down there then in verse 19, and he said, "Hear thou, my son, and be wise, and guide thine heart in the way," or along your life's path. Carry this fear of the Lord with you as you go from step to step, from day to day. And he says there, be not among, he starts this thing, be not among wine bibbers and among riotous eaters, gluttons of the flesh. It talks about that. For the drunkard and the glutton shall come to poverty, and drowsiness shall clothe a man with rags. That we get into that, and we come to this, life for the young man or the young woman. It's full of forks in the road. There's decisions that they have to make, that we've all had to make at one time or another. I heard a preacher, a friend of mine, say one time he never could really understand why young people had so many life one-time chances to make the right decision. And that's a little bit paraphrased, but when you're growing up and everything's pulling and tugging at you, and the devil's making this kind of stuff look like fun, and you have to make these decisions. Am I going there or am I not? And these are the kind of decisions, today, in the day that we live in, we hear about this all the time. We've come to the place in our country, I believe, where parents feel like, if all the kids are doing is drinking, they're doing a pretty good job. Well, that may not necessarily be so, but yet, when there's so many drugs, and today adults or you hear about this opioid addiction all the time, and all that stuff, this addictions in the body will take you places that you do not want to go. Trust me on that. It tells you, as he gave these instructions, he's talking about keeping a clear mind, not letting your mind get fogged up with these mind-altering drugs or alcohol and things like that. To keep a clear head, and it will. If you don't, then you're going to be like what it says over in the book of Luke in chapter 6 verse 39. Then you become like the blind leading the blind, and Jesus said, then both of you will fall in the ditch, and that's where that will go. This fogging your mind up with things other than God will it'll just take you places you don't want to go. And I don't want to get redundant in that, but sin will take you further than you ever dreamed of wanting to go. And so anyway, that's what he talks about there. There's all kinds of warnings in the Bible, and there again, for the New Testament Christian, all things may be legal or lawful, but not all things are expedient. If I've been talking to you or anybody about being saved, or just talking to you about being in church, coming to church and listening to Brother Steve preach or something, but if I'm doing that, and the next time you see me, I'm carrying a quart of Jack Daniels out of Snyder's grocery store up here, then I've shot that testimony. I've shot a hole in the boat, and you're not going to pay any attention to that. That's just the way that it is. We talk a lot, this thing about the drinking stuff, but and we don't like to talk about this very much, but he talks about gluttony right in the middle of it, and there's a progression there in this riotous living that this uncontrolled eating goes right along with the alcoholism, the drinking, this party life. You look on, you see it on TV all the time. I don't see it all the time because I don't watch soap operas, but I've seen it on TV where they show these places where these young people are in there and they're social drinking and having them a good time and all that, but they don't. They've always got the lights on and everything's rosy and we're living life large and all that. Well, that's TV. That's TV and that's the movies. That ain't life. That's not real life at all, and that's not how that works. And so it's as he goes on with that, he says that a lifestyle like that you may have something when you start, but you won't have when it's over, because you'll spend your money and you'll be dressed in rags, it says. And another thing about that, and I've kind of always hated to hear somebody that come in the church and they'll give a testimony about, how they've sunk deep in drugs and all that and God delivered them, which is great, but yet a lot of things that I've done in my life, I wish I had enough sense not to have gone there in the first place, and then you wouldn't have the thoughts and the memories to deal with afterwards. But anyway, you can involve yourself in that lifestyle, and as long as you've got money and sense of humor and all that's going to be great. But I guarantee you, when the money stops, your friends will be gone. They'll be over to somebody else that's got money, and that's just the way the devil works, and that is definitely the way it is. We start out in verse 17 there, and that was the 13th saying. And so as we drop on down through here, the 17th saying, it begins to talk about the people that you run with. It pays you to know who you're running with. Even as you go through life and you have to deal with different issues. You need to know who you're running with. And I'll say this, as a Christian, we need to have a good testimony. In all things, we need to have a good testimony. But that does not mean that I need to go down to the local beer joint and share that testimony with somebody that's drunk, because you're wasting your time in the first place. And besides that, the devil will suck you right in there if you're not careful. And so anyway, I want to say that. And so anyway, then I want to drop down then, because he gets real explicit, and I don't have a whole lot of time left here, but he asks 6 rhetorical questions there in verse 29. He says, who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babbling? Who hath wounds without cause? And who has redness of eyes? And then in verse 30, he begins to answer those questions back there. When you think about those things, he said, the first one, he says, those that tarry long at the wine, the party crowd, they that go to seek mixed wine. And in that phrase, mixed wine there in Solomon, or the book of Proverbs there, it's talking about mixing, we call it a mixed drink today with, whatever they put in them. I don't know, but you mix your drugs and your drink up together and get this cocktail out of it to blow the top off your head, I suppose. But anyway, he said, they that tarry long at the wine, that spend their time. How many marriages today are broken because the husband spent too much time in a beer joint, or any time in a beer joint, instead of going home and being with his wife. It happens every day, all the time. And even, excuse me, even women, because a lot of women work today, and they get off and they want to go have a drink after work at the Eagles Club, and all that junk that goes with that, and marriages are broke up, and kids are the really, really sad part. The kids are the ones that they always are the ones that pay the ultimate price for those types of things. And he goes on, he says there in verse 31, look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth its color in the cup, when it moveth itself upright, because that's what alcohol does in a drink. You can set it up on a table and you can sit down there and look at it, and I suppose wine does too. I don't know. But then he says there, at the last, it biteth like a serpent, stings like an adder. And he says, then he goes on, he says, thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things, or things that are down inside. When it talks about the heart, it's talking about your inner being, really your brain, that you'll say things that you would never ever think about saying when you get under the effects of alcohol. And it doesn't take hardly any before. The very first thing that goes when your mind begins to be overwhelmed with alcohol or to be affected by alcohol is your judgment. And you'll say things, you'll do things that you would not ordinarily ever think about doing. And it's just, that's the way it is. He says, yeah, thou shalt be he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or he that lieth on the top of the mast. And it gives that analogy there of somebody that has gone to bed, and they lay there and the bed's wobbling all over the place, or spinning around, and they're dizzy, and next thing you know they're sick, and or the one he says that lieth atop the top of the mast, where they climb the up into what they would call a crow's nest then, and you'd be sick, just from really sick. And he said, and they have stricken me, or I've been, actually he said, I've been beat up. He said, and he was so sick, and he didn't even know it. He was so drunk he didn't even know that he had been beat up. And he said, I didn't even feel it. I knew a friend, and he's dead now. I used to work with this man a long time ago, and that happened to him, and he told me, he said, the last thing I remembered was a brick coming at me, and it was winter time. When they got finished with him, they threw him over in the bed of his pickup, and if it hadn't have been cold, he would have bled to death right there in the truck, in the back of the truck, and out having a good time at that beer joint. So, you know, there's nothing. They say there's nothing worse than a reformed drunk, and I'm just going to tell you to stay away from this stuff. If there's a young person that's watching this somewhere, stay away from it. Better not to ever go there than to go there and then have to deal with the consequences of it. There's a whole lot I could say, and I'd really like to back up and go to the middle of this and just start over and spend verse by verse time, but I'm out of time, and so I'm going to quit. Appreciate you all, your comments and watching these Sunday school lessons, and Brother Jim and Brother Ron. I think we're going to kind of take turns with them now as we go along. So bear with us, and I'll be back with you in a couple of weeks.